Well, hello, my name is Vicky Forrest and I'm the CEO of ANZA Technology Network, and I'd like to welcome you to ANZA's first webinar of 2012, The New Entrepreneur, New Rules for the New Era of Innovation and Entrepreneurship, with Bill Reichert, Managing Director of Garage Technology Ventures here in Silicon Valley. But before we get going, I just have a few housekeeping items to go over. If you have any technical problems during the webinar, please call the number on your screen, which is country code 1-805-617-7000. This webinar will be recorded and all attendees will receive a link so you can replay today's presentation. Now, there's a very large audience today and all audience members are in listen-only mode. This is to ensure the presenters can be heard by everyone. If you have questions during the presentation, please type these in the question box on your webinar dashboard. We'll answer as many of the questions as we can at the end of Bill's presentation. As many of you know, ANZA is a business accelerator based here in Silicon Valley with an office in Shanghai and China. We work with entrepreneurs from Australia, New Zealand, Asia and the Americas who run innovative technology businesses and help those companies get a foothold into new markets like the US and China. And now I'd like to invite you to take part in our first audience poll to help us get a better idea of who we have listening in today. So this will give us an idea of the size of company that we have here in the audience. So I'll ask each of you to select the radio button that best describes your company in numbers of employees. So 0 to 10 employees, up to 50 employees, 200. And then if you're in a larger company, of course, select the more than 200 employees. So we'll just wait a few seconds while everybody's making their selection there. And Javier, I'll ask you now to close the poll. And I think, yeah, we've got our results up, and we've got well 60% in the 0 to 10 employees. So really fantastic opportunity, and 23% in 0 to 50. So certainly we've got innovative companies here in the earlier stages of growing your company. But whether you're an early stage startup or a growing company with a lot of customers and with solid revenue, we think you'll find today's webinar of real value. If you've got questions during the presentation, please type them in the question box on your webinar dashboard, and we'll get to as many of those as we can during the Q&A. Now, Javier, I'm going to ask you to hand the screen across to Bill, and while you're taking care of that, I'd like to introduce Bill Reichert, the Managing Director of Garage Technology Ventures, which is a well-established venture fund here in Silicon Valley. Bill has more than 20 years' experience as an entrepreneur and operating executive before he joined Garage in '98. Where he now focuses on early-stage IT and material science companies. Bill speaks to the topic of entrepreneurship with some authority. Before Garage, he was a founder or executive in several venture-backed technology startups, including Trademark Software, The Learning Company, and Academic Sciences. He earned his BA at Harvard College and MBA at Stanford. He's been a founding contributor to many of the organizations in Silicon Valley focused on entrepreneurs, including the Churchill Club, Silicon Valley Association of Startup Entrepreneurs, and he's a member of the Council of Foreign Relations in New York City. It is my pleasure to have Bill lead ANZA's first webinar of 2012. Ladies and gentlemen, Bill Reichert.
So Bill, thank you very much, Vicki. Can you all hear me now?
Yep, loud and clear, Bill. Thank you.
Very good. Very good. Well, Vicki, thank you very much for that generous introduction, and I am very honored and delighted to have the opportunity to do a webinar here with the ANZA Technology Network. I have a great love for all of the folks that you guys are involved with, and am delighted for the opportunity to talk a little bit about our perspective here at Garage on what's going on in the entrepreneur ecosystem and what lessons we have learned and what lessons we think entrepreneurs should learn about the evolution of entrepreneurship and innovation and the venture capital community over the last several years. So we're going to talk today about the new entrepreneur. The implication, of course, is that entrepreneurship has changed over the years. And as Vicki explained in terms of my background, I've spent most of my career on the entrepreneur side of the table as an entrepreneur, spending a lot of time working with building my company, pitching to venture capitalists, hiring and recruiting teammates, and going out and selling to customers. We've learned a lot over the years about what works and what doesn't work in the entrepreneurship space, and probably a lot of you have seen lots and lots written about the topic of innovation and entrepreneurship, and a lot of people think hard about what makes a good entrepreneur, what distinguishes entrepreneurs from other people. And so we've got a perspective, a little perspective on what distinguishes entrepreneurs from other people, and I think it's best typified by a quote from George Bernard Shaw that I like to share with you. The reasonable man adapts himself to the world. The unreasonable one persists in trying to adapt the world to himself. Therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable man. And so that, to some extent, characterizes what we see in the best of entrepreneurs. The best of entrepreneurs do not sit back and say, aha, I understand the way the world is. I guess I just have to accommodate myself to the way the world is. Indeed, the entrepreneurs that we see, the entrepreneurs that actually change the world, are the ones that, from the outside looking in, appear unreasonable, to the extent that they actually have this belief that they can change the world. And so to the outside world, the idea that you as a lone entrepreneur can build a company that can displace maybe some large current incumbent corporation, or that can fix some large major problem, or address some big new opportunity in the world, that seems pretty unreasonable in the grand scheme of things. But to the entrepreneur, it seems perfectly reasonable, and that's kind of the difference. To the outsider, the entrepreneur may seem unreasonable, but the entrepreneur, looking at the opportunity and looking at the challenges, on balance says, this is a perfectly reasonable thing to do, given the goal that I'm trying to achieve. So the question of what is reasonable, what is unreasonable, I like to use this particular example. If you notice the picture here, it's somewhat applicable to this particular group. This is the Sky Tower in Auckland, New Zealand. And this is a picture of a guy jumping off the Sky Tower in Auckland, New Zealand. And to a lot of people who look at this, they think that's a pretty unreasonable thing to do. To jump off of a 600-foot, 60-story tower doesn't seem like a reasonable way to spend an afternoon. As it happens, that person, the picture you can't tell, but that happens to be a picture of me taken by a friend of mine who was standing at the bottom. My friend, who was a Kiwi, in fact, absolutely refused to jump off this tower. And I thought, well, you know, what could possibly go wrong? And after all, there I was in New Zealand, and at that point, having spent several days in New Zealand, I still had not jumped off of anything. So I thought, how can I go home to the United States and tell my friends that I didn't jump off of anything? So to me, it seemed perfectly reasonable to jump off the Sky Tower. So the point again is that what an entrepreneur thinks is reasonable may be very different from what the rest of the world thinks is unreasonable, and that's the challenge as well as the opportunity that entrepreneurs face. So with that context, I thought what I would do is share with you today our top 10 new rules for unreasonable success if you're an entrepreneur starting up a new company. The first rule has to do with the fundamental objective of entrepreneurship. Now, the old rule was the reason you start up a company as an entrepreneur is to go make money. The new rule is, in fact, it's not about making money, it's about creating value. And the point here is, and this is a point that we have lost several times in different cycles of venture capital and entrepreneurship, if your focus is to start something to make money, almost certainly you will fail, because making money is not a sufficient focus for creating a huge company. If all you're focused on is making money, it's harder to attract a team of people who are passionate about what you're doing. It's harder to attract partners, it's harder to attract customers. But if your focus is to create value, to create a product or a service that absolutely delights customers, that solves a big problem, that turns a huge opportunity into a huge new business, creating value is what motivates people to be successful. Creating value is what you do, what you have to do in order to delight customers. That kind of focus is what you have to have if you want to attract top-tier talent to your company. It's what you have to have if you want to attract partners who want to work with your company to go to market. So the focus needs to be first on creating value. Only by creating value will you eventually create wealth. But if your focus is, here's an opportunity, I can hack together some code and maybe I can make a bunch of money, then most likely you're not going to succeed. And most likely you're not going to attract the kind of people you want to attract to your company. The second rule has to do with getting started. The old rule for getting started was it's all about a brilliant founder. And that's sort of the iconography of entrepreneurship. We think of great companies in conjunction with these brilliant individuals. But the reality is that all successful companies are based on brilliant teams, not just brilliant founders. If you look back through the history of great companies, you'll find that, for every Bill Gates, there was a Paul Allen. For every Steve Jobs, there was a Steve Wozniak. Even for every Mark Zuckerberg, there was a team of talent around him that enabled him to build up a Facebook to where it is. We think of the brilliant team in terms of a parable that we like to tell when we're coaching teams on what we're looking for in a brilliant entrepreneurial team. And the parable is one you're probably somewhat familiar with. It's the parable of the optimist, the pessimist, and the engineer. And as you know, the optimist is the person who sees a glass of water and says, hey, this glass is half full. The pessimist, of course, looks at that same glass and says, geez, that glass is half empty. And the engineer is the person who looks at the glass and says, this glass was engineered to be twice as big as it needs to be. Now, the point of that, I hope you get, is that every brilliant team needs a combination of complementary attitudes and skill sets in order to be a brilliant team. If everybody is the enthusiastic, optimistic, change the world, visionary, drinking the Kool-Aid person, then probably you're going to miss some stuff along the way. And as painful as it may be, when you build your team, you don't want to hire people who are just like you, assuming you're the optimistic, visionary person on the team. You need to find complementary attitudes. You need to find the pessimist, the person who says, I'm bought into this vision. I agree this is a big opportunity, but if this doesn't happen this way, then what? If this doesn't happen this way, then what are we going to do? The pessimist is the person who sits there and says, you know, we're probably going to have to adjust a few times along the way. Let's make sure that we structure our company in such a way that we have the flexibility to adjust if things don't work out perfectly well. The optimist, of course, is going to assume that things are going to work out perfectly well and we'll always hit our business plan numbers. The pessimist knows that most likely we're not going to hit our business plan numbers, and we've got to make sure we have contingency plans in place. The third personality type, though, the one I refer to as the engineer, is really the realist, the person who looks at the world and can see the world the way it truly is. Again, the problem with a lot of entrepreneurial teams is they see the world the way they wish it were. They see the world as, boy, as soon as we introduce our product, the world is going to beat a path to our door, revenues are going to shoot up, and here's that hockey stick in our Excel spreadsheet that we know is conservative, right? So you need someone else who can be out there. Doesn't necessarily have to be an engineer. It's just the personality type that can go out, listen to the marketplace, talk to customers, look at development schedules, look at budgets, look at the way you're operating your business, and can assess things realistically. So that's the brilliant team. You need the optimist. You also need the pessimist. You also need the realist. The third rule has to do with your management style. The old rule was what we were all trained to the extent that we had training in management skills, whether it was in school or whether it was in a corporate training program or wherever, or reading a book. Everybody says, you know, the right way to manage things is you plan the work and you work the plan, you know, and variations on that. That's great if you're running a large enterprise and you've got lots of variables you're trying to manage. It doesn't work, though, if you've got a small company and there are only 3 of you trying to make this happen. The new rule is you plan as you go. Now that's very contrary to the way a lot of people work in terms of their instincts. A lot of entrepreneurs, though, you know, they spend a lot of time trying to put together these elaborate plans and trying to do the market research before they go out in the marketplace. The reality is that you've got to get to market as fast as you possibly can. Even if it's with vaporware, you've got to get out there and you got to talk to customers and find out what it is they actually do, what it is they actually want, how it is they are responding to your value proposition. And then, based on iterative feedback that you get in the marketplace, you figure out your next milestone. You figure out what you're going to do next in terms of a prototype, in terms of an alpha, in terms of a beta, in terms of your launch, in terms of your go-to-market strategy. You've got to plan as you go because you know that there are so many things that you don't know that you're only going to learn as you get out into the marketplace. So, in this vein, we have what we call the Garage 24-hour rule of planning. And the Garage 24-hour rule of planning is you only get 24 hours plan before you go out and start testing it. You spend any more time doing research on the internet or whatever you're doing spreadsheets on Excel, and you're wasting your time because you're doing it in the vacuum of not being with the potential customers and partners, figuring out what's going to work. So we see, again, 2 types of people that come into our office. We see polished, experienced, they got MBAs, they're articulate, they've got these really fancy PowerPoint presentations, they've got great spreadsheets, and they can predict, you know, down to the paperclip how much they're going to spend, you know, in 2014. And we're saying, you know, God bless, we appreciate your training and your intelligence, but what we really care about is how much traction do you have with your prospective customers? How many conversations have you had? How many alpha partners have you signed up? What feedback do you have that any of this is true? So the other team we see are the guys that come in their T-shirts. They've got something of a pitch deck put together, but most importantly, what they're really excited about showing us is their demo. they've got some product they've hacked together, or they've got some technology that they're pulling together. There's, we get these wire boards on our conference room table, and the guys say, no, it's not going to look like this. Imagine this on an ASIC, and it's down to 1 inch by 1 inch. But this is just our breadboard. And they're hacking something together, and they're taking it to potential OEMs, potential customers, and finding out, what do you need? What are the feature sets? What sort of speed does it have to have? What's the cost constraint? They're out there in the marketplace developing their plan as they design their product. So plan as you go, very contrary to traditional education. Rule number 4 has to do with your focus. The old rule was failure is not an option, right? We all heard that growing up in every environment. That's the bold thing to say. We're driving forward, failure is not an option. The reality is failure is a requirement. And again, that's totally contrary to the kind of common wisdom that you get out there in the corporate world. But this is the reason that corporately trained people are not good at startups, because it is indeed the culture of a corporation where you've got a pyramid of talent that's fighting its way up the ladder to try to get to higher management. In a large corporate environment, it's true that failure is not an option, because they have the luxury of looking across the next tier of talent and saying, okay, which 3 guys hit their plan and which 3 guys missed their plan? And it's easy. We pick the 3 guys that hit their plan, we promote them, and we fire the other 3 guys. And so that breeds this culture that says, I'm not going to innovate outside of this narrow box that has been defined for me by this corporate culture. But that's not the way startups work. The way startups work is repeated failures until they have success. The analogy I like to share on this one is, and this dates me, I guess, but I'm hoping that most of you know who Michael Jordan is or was. Michael Jordan, was in his heyday, gosh, how long ago was it, in basketball. And was one of the highest scorers in the history of basketball. But what nobody talks about is the fact that Michael Jordan missed more baskets when he was at his peak. Michael Jordan missed more shots than most everyone else in the entire National Basketball Association. And that's kind of counterintuitive, right? Because you think, here's the guy who's the best shooter in, the highest scorer in all of basketball. The reality is he missed a lot of shots. And the reason is, of course, the reason he's a high scorer is because he took a lot of shots. And that's the analogy in entrepreneurship. You gotta take a lot of shots, because that's the only way you learn. The only way you learn when you're in an entirely new world is, there isn't a roadmap. There isn't data that says this is exactly what's going to happen if I do this and this and this, because by definition you're blazing a new trail. And so you have to fail. You have to take shots, and you're going to miss a bunch of them. And the key is to learn from those missed shots, to learn from your mistakes. That's what people mean by learning from mistakes. It means you have to fail. You have to take shots. You have to miss. You have to learn. You have to adjust. And that's the way you actually narrow down to knowing the focus of your company. Only by failure can you get to a focal point where you know the opportunity for success is focused. The 5th rule has to do with the business model. The old rule in the entrepreneur ecosystem here in Silicon Valley was you start up a company, you put together a pitch, you raise venture capital, and you go from there. The new rule is you got to bootstrap. The unfortunate reality globally as well as here in Silicon Valley is that venture capital is back on its heels, particularly when you're talking about very early stage technology-based companies. Now, a lot of you may or may not know or be seeing, looking at this bubble that we've got going here in Silicon Valley in the area of what we call social local mobile gaming. Other people generally call call it, Web 2.0. But so there's a tremendous amount of activity going on in the social, local, mobile gaming arena, and you're seeing lots and lots of companies getting funded. For the most part, they're getting a little bit of funding from angel investors and from small funds, but you're seeing lots of these companies that are starting up, hack together something over the weekend, show up at some demo day, and they get $150,000 from some angels. And so that signals to the rest of the entrepreneur community that that's the way to go. The problem is, if you're not in social, local, mobile gaming, it doesn't work that way. Right now, the venture opportunity outside of that narrow space is much, much more challenging. And so the onus is on the entrepreneur now to figure out a way to build a business without requiring venture capital, or without requiring a lot of capital. And that requires that you develop your skills in figuring out ways to generate revenues early, or figure out other ways to generate resources without having to pay for them. And that includes partnerships and customers. It includes partnering with research organizations, with universities, with other corporations. There are a whole bunch of models around bootstrapping that I encourage every entrepreneur to learn if they want to start up a company right now. It doesn't mean don't go after venture capital. Needless to say, because we're a venture capital firm, we're believers in the venture capital model. But our advice to most entrepreneurs is, in this current environment, it's going to take a long time to get venture capital. And so you have to figure out a way to make progress while you're pursuing that venture capital. So learn how to bootstrap. Learn how to figure out ways to make progress without an injection of capital. The sixth rule has to do with what we call the foundation of innovation, right? The old rule was that in the Silicon Valley venture capital world, innovation was about good old American know-how. And for the early few decades, of Silicon Valley, you had a lot of Midwestern university PhD scientists and engineers who were starting up, who might have worked in the defense industry, they might have worked somewhere else in technology, starting up these startups and getting funded by the Silicon Valley venture capital community. Then in the late 80s, 90s, and then increasingly since 2000, we've seen increasingly that the face of Silicon Valley and the face of innovation has changed. And now it's about good new global know-how. And what everybody understands today, whether you're an investor or whether you're a corporation, and certainly if you're an entrepreneur, is that innovation can happen all over the world. It can happen anywhere in the world. And in fact, it is happening all over the world. And so if you want to play in this innovation game, you have to be global day one. You have to have your finger on the pulse of what's going on in your sector around the world. You can't simply assume that here I am in my local market, I can start up here and hopefully I can go from a local market to the global market. That may be okay tactically. It may be appropriate to find your first customers locally, but as you're designing your business and launching your business, you should be thinking not just about the first customers and the local customers, you need to be thinking about how am I going to expand globally. Because the reality is you're going to have to compete globally because somebody else in some other corner of the world is going to innovate the same solution you've got. And eventually, if you both are going to become big companies, you're going to bump into each other. And so you've got to be thinking about how you're going to compete globally from day one. Part of that has to do with tapping into the talent around the world. And so increasingly, we see teams that have people on the teams from all over the place. Not all of whom are living here. So we have a lot of teams, probably most teams we see these days, some number of the founding team was not born in the United States. But beyond that, most teams we see these days have someone or some group of people elsewhere in the world who are doing R&D, who are partners in some way, who are part of that team and part of that company from the beginning. That's about, tapping global know-how and tapping into the global opportunity. Rule number 7 has to do with competitive advantage. The old rule was that you have a brilliant new technology, and if you're the first one to market, then you should be the one to win. The reality is things are changing so fast in terms of technology cycles that even if you are the first one to market, the chances are that the chances of you being the winner are entirely dependent upon your being able to continue to innovate, continue to adapt your solution to the changing marketplace. Because if you don't adapt your solution as the market evolves, some new entrant is going to come along, take advantage of all the market development you've done, leapfrog your technology, and take the market away from you. We've seen this time and time again in different technology cycles. Again, on the current players, for example, in the browser market, do not represent the first movers in the browser market. In different applications, every application you're using today, probably it's Microsoft. In terms of Office applications, Microsoft was not the first mover in any of the applications where they own the market share today. Obviously, Google was not the first mover when it came either to search or when it came to pay-per-click. Google didn't invent search, but they innovated rapidly when they came to the market, and Google did not invent pay-per-click, but they innovated rapidly after borrowing the model from somewhere else. Facebook certainly did not invent social networks. Facebook has simply been better than their predecessors at innovating rapidly and meeting the needs of their customers. So again, it's not about first mover, it's about fast adapter. You've got to be willing to cannibalize your first product rapidly, and this is why it's important not to over-engineer your first product. We see time and time again startup companies that put their entire life's meaning into this product or technology that they've come up with that they think is this brilliant solution. And there's a natural tendency for engineers in particular to over-engineer solutions because they have a vision of this perfect solution. And they're not going to release it into the marketplace until it's perfect. And then they get it into the marketplace, and it does pretty well. But it's not perfect. And the customers tell them it's not perfect. And so you see two types of entrepreneurs at that point. There's one type of entrepreneur who listens to the customer feedback and says, those people are stupid. They don't get it. They don't appreciate the beauty and the elegance of my solution. That's one type of entrepreneur. The other type of entrepreneur says, holy crap, I've got to fix this because if I don't fix it, somebody else is going to come along and meet the needs of these customers. And he says, forget the first version, scrap it. We're going to rebuild something new. So, and you can guess which team generally wins. It's the team that decides, I don't care how brilliant I thought that first version was, we're going to scrap it and we're going to build a new version that's even better. Rule number 8 has to do with your marketing strategy. The old rule was, if I build it, they will come. This is called the Field of Dreams marketing strategy from the movie by the same name. If only the world sees the brilliance of my solution, they will beat a path to my door. So I don't have to worry about marketing strategy. I don't need to worry about those sales guys with their fast cars and their cologne and their goatees and all that stuff. I don't need to worry about any of that because I'm building a whole new company here that's based on the brilliance of my technology and my solution. If only the world sees it, then I've got all of my sales and marketing problems solved. Unfortunately, that's not the way the world works. The reality is the right way to think about the relationship between your product and your service, or your service and the marketplace, is if they come, we will build it. This was best exemplified by a quote from Seagate. Seagate, a classic technology company here in Silicon Valley, discovered that they needed to reverse the traditional development process, which was design, build, and sell. And currently, instead, they sell, design, and build. And that has saved us from innumerable problems, as he says. The point is, you go to the market and figure out what is the next version I'm going to build, rather than building something and trying to shove it down the throat of the marketplace. So that's the twist in marketing strategy from the old-fashioned approach, which was build something you think is brilliant and then spend money on marketing and sales, sharing with the world your brilliance. No, instead you've got to discover what the market's going to believe is brilliant and then build them something that delights them. Rule number 9 has to do with the pace of change. So, you know, we have this common experience, and we see it in the media all the time, that the pace of change is accelerating. And what did I hear? The other day, I got a new statistic. Somebody was saying that, excuse me, somebody had a statistic that, what was it, 50% of all of the data that has been generated in the history of mankind has been generated in the last 2 years. You know, it's a totally bizarre statistic, right? I mean, but it goes to the, you know, the pace of knowledge, the knowledge of mankind is doubling every 2 years. You hear that sort of quote. The quote you most commonly hear is that, you know, the pace of change is accelerating. And that's certainly the way things feel, because in a globally interconnected world, we are collecting huge amounts of data, you know, just if only log files. But even beyond that, there's vast amounts of data that are being collected with every transaction that takes place in the electronic world, whether it's a financial transaction, an e-commerce transaction, or a person-to-person social transaction. Data is generated by the petabyte, right? And so we have, because of all of this, we feel as though things are changing rapidly. So it causes us to have a point of view about the world when we're designing our companies. It makes us assume that if we come up with a good solution, that of course the world is going to adopt that solution rapidly. But the reality is that for every new innovation, for every new solution or product or service, change takes time, because it just takes longer than we expect for people to both discover and learn and understand and appreciate the value of, and then adopt and then use and then share any new innovation. Now, some things seem to go blazingly fast, right? It feels as though Facebook went blazingly fast from nothing in 2004 to 800 million people in 2012. So 8 years, 800 million people, that's an extraordinary number. But fundamentally, in terms of most products, most technologies, you're not going to get that experience. Change takes time. And so the reality is, when you're doing your planning in terms of how much cash you're going to need and how much time you're going to need and what your sales cycle is going to be, entrepreneurs always overestimate. They always are optimists when it comes to the sales cycle and to the take-up rate. And so that's why That's why when it comes down to the micro level, your product, your service, your solution, at the micro level, it will take longer, it will cost more than you expect in your wildest, pessimistic dreams. That's just the reality of 99.9% of businesses. And that's why 99.9% of startup companies miss their business plan, because they don't see the cumulative effect of all of the delays in the sales cycle and the development cycle and the approval cycle and the payment cycle that go on when it comes down to really doing business. So the caution here is, even if it feels as though things are moving quickly in your sector, as you're planning for your success, understand it's going to take longer than you expect. The thing I've been around a while looking at a lot of different technologies, and I think back 20 years or so at all of these sectors. When you think back on what we thought the world would be in 1992, think about it, 1992, for some of us it feels like it wasn't that long ago. For others, I'm sure, who were on the call, you were perhaps in diapers. But in any case, or even younger. But in 1992, what did we imagine the world would be like in all of these sectors? We assumed that we would have, back then we were 10 years past the oil crisis. We assumed we were going to figure this thing out. We were going to solve the problem, that this was not going to be an issue. But, here we are. But, more in the technology space, in the software space, 1992 was the first emergence of, the end of that year was actually the emergence of the World Wide Web. We had believe it or not, we had the Internet. We were aware of the Internet. We had all of these online services that had been around for 5, 6, 7 years. That most of us have forgotten about. But we knew about online services. We had seen the artificial intelligence debacle happen in the 80s. We assumed that software would be much better in the 20 years from now. And yet, you look at software today, on the one hand, you can look at it and say, well, look at all these apps that we have today that we didn't have then. But on the flip side, if you look at what we thought was going to happen in terms of software capability, including software development tools, it's surprising how primitive the world still is in terms of the expertise in software. Same applies to things like bandwidth and medicine and transportation and television. All of these things have made incredible progress, but not as incredible as fast as we thought it would be. Transportation being sort of the ultimate disappointment. If you think about, what is the flagship technology for transportation today, it's the Boeing 747, which was developed in the 1960s. So obviously all of the electronics, all of the components of the 747 have changed dramatically in that period of time. But basically it still takes roughly the same amount of time to get from Sydney to San Francisco as it did 20 and 40 years ago, which is pretty shocking. And lastly, don't get me started on television. In 1990, I was involved with a company that was called PCTV. And the big idea in 1990 was that, of course, all television was going to be digital, and therefore all television would be susceptible to distribution on demand, and we would have a world in which we should have, by 1994, 1996, we should have a world in which all of our video viewing would be customized to our own particular desires. We could watch whatever we wanted, whenever we wanted, because that's what digital promised. And here we are. Finally, it's 2012, and we have some semblance of that, but it took much, much longer than we thought it was going to take. So again, that was a little bit of an excessive rant on how much longer things take than we thought. But it's an important lesson to understand as an entrepreneur when you're doing your planning. And then the last lesson, rule number 10, has to do with the source of innovation. The old rule, the old fundamental assumption of Silicon Valley was that technology drives innovation. It's about, basic research develops new technologies enable new solutions are the basis of innovation. But fundamentally, when you think about what causes successful companies, what causes successful products, you realize people trump technology. It's the human component that decides who the winner is, not the technical component. We've seen that time and time again throughout technology cycles. It's not always the most elegant or even the superior technology that wins. It's other factors. Political factors in terms of relationships between corporations, user factors in terms of consumer adoption, consumer preferences, user preferences in terms of inside the enterprise. Employees rejected technologies that were designed to improve the productivity of the enterprise because they didn't want to change their behaviors. And so whenever you're designing a solution, it's important to appreciate that people always trump technology. That starts with your own company. Inside your company, the development cycles are all about people. In terms of your go-to-market strategy, your partners, the companies you work with, whether you're working with OEMs or resellers or distributors, it includes your customers, it includes your buyers. Those are the ones that make the decisions that affect your success. It's not just about having superior technology. And that's a lesson that is lost on a lot of engineers, again, who are so enamored with the brilliance of their technology, they lose sight of the people component that's required to build a brilliant company. So one last bonus rule called pitching to investors in terms of what does it take to be successful when you're pitching investors, whether they're angel investors or venture capital investors or corporate investors. The old rule was it's about the return on investment. That's always the assumption. That was how I was raised. I was told that the way investors operate is they review investment opportunities and they make a decision based upon which investment opportunity is going to generate the highest return on investment. That seems totally rational. It seems logical. It seems like that makes sense, right? But what I learned, pitch after pitch, company after company, entrepreneur after entrepreneur, is that that's not really the way investors work. The dirty little secret about venture capital is they don't make decisions based on an analytic framework at the bottom of which drops out some metric called return on investment. The way investors invest in startup companies is it's about the love. And so the dirty little secret that we like to coach all of our entrepreneurs to realize is do not get yourself wrapped up focusing on checking off all these little boxes of analytics that you think are important to the investor. What are the resumes of the team? What is the size of the market? What's the segmentation of the market? What's the performance metric of your technology? What are the elements of your competitive advantage? Entrepreneurs get incredibly focused on sort of filling in all those blanks and creating this comprehensive analysis and description of how they address all of these components that they think the investors are focused on. And so I say this carefully because it is important that you have answers to all of those questions. But what's most important is that you figure out how to differentiate yourself from all of the other entrepreneurs that are filling in all the same blanks. So you've got every investor is looking at all these other entrepreneurs who are pretty clever about putting together pitches and putting together slideshows and putting together Excel spreadsheets. The difference is that the entrepreneurs that investors invest in are the ones they fall in love with. So then the question is, how do investors fall in love? Well, what you know is that humans do not fall in love with their brains. They fall in love with their hearts. And so how do you get to an investor's heart? We've been accused as venture capitalists of not having a heart. And so that's a really hard problem then, right? But the reality is even venture capitalists have emotions. And what happens, in fact, is somebody walks into our office, we hear a pitch, and we fall in love. And we listen to this pitch, and we look at each other, and we go, wow. Now, why do we say wow? It's not because of the analytics. It's because there's something extraordinary that this group brought into our conference room. It may be the size of their vision. It may be their quality as human beings. You know, it may be, boy, these people are so smart and so interesting to be with. I really want to spend time with these people. That could be part of the wow. It could be the secret sauce. You know, we've cracked a technology problem that nobody on the planet has cracked, or we figured a solution to a problem that nobody else has figured out the solution to that we've never heard before. But it's the emotional reaction that gets you progress as an entrepreneur, not an analytic reaction. So the reality is we fall in love, and then we go do the analysis to justify why we fell in love and to make sure we're not making a big mistake. But that's the sequence. So if you're an entrepreneur, you've got to figure out what is it about our proposition that will make an investor go, wow. And that's what we got to get across when we meet an investor. Not 35 slides that check every box that you've ever seen in any blog or any book about how to pitch to an investor. Simplify it down to what's going to make them go wow, and then be prepared to answer all the basic questions that you need to answer. So that's the bonus rule. So with that, those are the top 10 new rules for unreasonable success. You know, create value, it's about the team, plan as you go, fail early and often, learn how to bootstrap, go global day one, be a fast adapter. Build your business outside in, from the customer in, not from the engineering drawings up. Be realistic about the pace of adoption, and remember people trump technology. And of course, related to people trumping technology is it's about the love. So, to everyone and all, that is the new entrepreneur. I am delighted to have the opportunity to present with you. I'm hoping we have time for a few questions. If you are looking at the screen now, you can see some other resources, including on our website at Garage. We have a number of resources for entrepreneurs on doing executive summaries, the criteria for venture investment, getting to wow, how to do a pitch. You may also know my partner's books. My partner, Guy Kawasaki, wrote a book called The Art of the Start that was based on our experience coaching entrepreneurs over the years and what works and what doesn't work. More recently, Guy has written a new book on how to get people to fall in love with you, and he calls that Enchantment. If after we finish with the questions today, anybody has an unanswered question, I am giving you, with some trepidation, I'm giving you my contact information. But having said that, seriously, feel free to contact me if you've got any questions. If you disagree, if you think that I'm crazy, or if you think I'm brilliant, I'm happy to listen and read all of your emails or tweets. And with that, I think I need to turn it over to the moderator for questions for the question and answer period. Is that correct? Do I have this right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
change the presenter back to Javier, and we will get quickly on with the show. So,
Okay.
Bill, thank you so much. That was that really does shine a light on the new era of entrepreneurship, and just picking up on your bonus point, we're going to run a second poll for the audience before we have time for maybe actually probably only a couple of questions. Javier, oh, thank you. So a simple yes or no is what we're calling for here. Who in the audience is ready to make a VC fall in love with you. So we'll just give you a few seconds to answer that, and then we'll move to Q&A. So Javier, if you can see the most votes are in, I'll get you to close the poll for us. And ooh, wow! Look at that. We've got an almost 50-50 split for people looking for investors and not. So that's a what do we say? We've got a balanced audience, Bill. And in fact,
well, it's an interesting question. I mean, it's hard to know what what the folks who said no think they're lacking. But I'm hoping they figure it out. And again, we do have a little bit more on what we call getting to wow on our website if people want to sort of drill in a little bit further in terms of what we think you can do to make your story more lovable.
Great. So, Bill, we have a very, very large pool of questions here. So I've made a bit of an executive decision, and one question that popped up multiple times is the one question that we'll just get you to spend some time answering for us, and then we'll close out with some details about ANZA's upcoming events. And that question is about the U.S. economy. A lot of people around the world are closely watching just what is going on here. What's your view of how the U.S. economy is currently and in the future likely to affect, technology and innovation and basically entrepreneurial ventures, generally? How do you see it? What effects do you see it having?
Yeah. I mean, good news, bad news. The good news, though, is we did not see much of an impact at all here in Silicon Valley in terms of the innovation energy, even through the darkest days of the meltdown. And even in the recession that followed, we were stunned at the degree to which tech companies, particularly earlier stage tech companies that were on a growth ramp with a novel new offering, were not seriously set back by the meltdown. So the good news side of the equation is if you've got a novel solution that solves a useful or solves an important problem, the global macroeconomy or the U.S. macroeconomy is not going to define your success path. And there's been a lot of research on this in terms of watching great companies' trajectories through recessions. And what people have noticed is that for a lot of great companies, going back 40 years, their revenue growth was barely affected by major economic disruptions. And so I would not be focused on the U.S. macroeconomy as an indicator at all of what was going to happen in the entrepreneur and innovation economy. The other side of the coin, though, and that is more challenging for the venture world, is that the effect of the meltdown in 2008-2009 was that the big institutional investors drew back in their support for venture capital. And so we have seen a dramatic drop-off around the globe of commitments of financial capital to venture capital. And that has not particularly slowed down some sectors like social, local, global, mobile gaming, but it has affected most of the other sectors. It's affected healthcare, it's affected clean tech, it's affected enterprise, and so the reduction in the capital available to the venture capital ecosystem has definitely affected those sectors. I don't think it's fundamentally affected innovation, but I think it's affected the ability of a lot of entrepreneurs to raise capital. Okay?
Great, thank you. Yeah, good, wonderful answer. Javier, I'll just get you to move to the next slide quickly for me because we're right on time here, and there's some important information on upcoming opportunities to get connected with the ANZA Technology Network. ANZA will be in Australia for 4 weeks during March, and I will be with one of our US-based mentors, John Bayer, and John and I will be available to meet with companies one-on-one to discuss your US or China business opportunities. We'll be in Melbourne, Adelaide, and Sydney, and I encourage you to email me to arrange to meet with us if you would like to talk about your business plans and how ANZA can help you accelerate them. And remember, of course, one-on-one meetings are always available via Skype no matter where you are in the world. So please visit our website, read more about our services, join up to receive our newsletter. It's free, it's only once a month, and it's the best way to stay in touch with our planned events and programs throughout the year. I want to thank you all again for attending and your great questions. We will have to get to answer them after the webinar closes, and so don't hesitate to email me or Bill, as he has kindly offered. Again, this webinar was recorded and will receive a link in the next few days. So on behalf of myself, Javier, and the ANZA team, we'd like to thank Bill Reichert and all of you for participating in our first webinar of 2012 today. It was a great success, and I look forward to connecting with many of you in the future. Thank you.